back, ladies and gentlemen. Our focus today is going to be on one specific organelle in particular, and that is the cell membrane. The cell membrane is absolutely essential for cells to be able to survive, as it is selectively permeable, which means that it allows some materials in the cell and some materials out of the cell. Now, that particular functionality is absolutely crucial for life. So let's dive in and see what that structure looks like, so that way we can figure out how exactly it is selectively permeable. So hopefully by the end of this video you should be able to do one key thing, and that is describe the function and structure of the cell membrane. As you can see, we have quite a few vocab terms here, ones you may not necessarily know, but we will go through these, and hopefully with a little bit of studying you'll be really good at knowing what these things do. Let's get started. So we talked a little bit about the cell membrane in our previous video, and that cell membrane is the boundary between the cell and outside environment that controls what enters and leaves the cell. So essentially the cell wall, essentially the cell membrane is the boundary between living and non-living. Now if we look at it up close, it's made up of a double layer of what are called phospholipids. Now phospholipids are made up of two things, a phosphate and a lipid group. The phosphate is the head of the phospholipid, and the lipid is the tail. So if you look at the phospholipid layer here, you can see that it forms a bilayer, which means that there's two layers. The hydrophilic heads, or the phosphate heads, are pointed to the outside of the layer. So again, it forms a double layer, and the heads are pointed to on the outside of the layer, and the tails are on the inside of the layer. Now you'll see what that means and why it's that case here in just a second, but keep in mind the cell membrane is that boundary, and the individual component that makes up most of the cell membrane is known as a phospholipid, where the phosphate is the head and the lipid is the tail. Now the phospholipids themselves are made up of a phosphate head, which is polar. We talked a lot about polarity last time. Things that are polar like to be near water. And the tails are nonpolar. They're made up of lipids, and we know lipids are fats and oils do not mix well with water. That is why this forms a bilayer. So the watery substance that's on the outside of the cell and on the inside of the cell, the heads want to be near. The term we use to describe that is hydrophilic, which means that the heads like to be near water. The tails are on the inside of the layer because they are nonpolar. They are known as hydrophobic because they dislike being near water. So as a result of their polarities, they form what is known as a bilayer, where the heads are pointed out and the tails are pointed in. This is very important for the cell membrane. Now the cell membrane is also known as what we call a fluid mosaic, or a fluid mosaic model. What that means is that it is flexible and bendable. So if I were to poke the cell membrane, it would bounce. Okay, it'd be very flexible. It's almost kind of like a fluid. If I were to poke through the cell membrane, because of the polarities, it would actually reform just like as it were before. We also call it a mosaic because it's made up of many individual components. While yes, most of the cell membrane is made up of phospholipids, there are lots of other materials that are in here. Now we won't talk about all of these in this level of biology, but you do need to understand that there are lots of different components in here. As you can see, there are lots of proteins and carbohydrates, and cholesterol is an important role in the cell membrane. And we've talked about this term before. The cell membrane is also selectively permeable, which means that it allows certain materials inside of the cell and certain materials out of the cell. We want to keep and take in the good stuff while leaving out or getting out all of the bad stuff we don't want inside of the cell. So the cell membrane acts very much like a bouncer. It controls what goes in and out of the cell. Now keep in mind that the cell membrane has receptors on the outside of it. It's a protein that can receive a signal, and that signal can come from other cells, it can come from other parts of the body that can tell it to produce a certain material or allow certain materials in or out of the cell. Now the way larger materials are able to get in and out of the cell is through what is known as a protein channel. Those protein channels allow for larger materials to be able to get inside of the cell that can't just simply diffuse directly through the cell membrane. So again, pretty short video here, but the cell membrane, the structure of the cell membrane is very important because it allows certain materials in and out of the cell. The cell membrane is very flexible as well. It's made up of two layers, which is why we call it a bilayer, And it's made up of phospholipids with the phosphate head that is hydrophilic and polar, and tails that are made up of lipids that are nonpolar, hydrophobic. The cell membrane also contains many proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids that play essential roles in ensuring that the cell can allow certain things in and out. Hopefully you've met the objective for this particular video. I know it's a little bit short, but again, short, sweet, and to the point is what we're looking for in these videos. Hope you have a fantastic day, guys, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.